The less density you have, the better service you'll get, right? And because you get more of that bandwidth from the cell. But if you're right on the edge of a populated area outside the suburbs, there'll be more people out there naturally. They'll probably, have to share that capacity with whatever they have at that moment. And over time, the capacity per square mile will go up because we'll be adding, again, L, S, and C bands or other frequencies with smaller cells that have more density, right? We'll be adding capacity. The answer will change and more services will come on. But I suspect that Netflix will be something that will be the last thing ever you get.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a real first world problem. I'm on a desert island. I can't get fucking Netflix.
I don't think
it's
a first world problem. That's exactly what you want to do on a desert island because you've got nothing else to do.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast, shot strangely on a Tuesday. I don't know if we've all recorded. Is it shot and recorded?
We have done them early in the week.
Have we?
We did one on a Monday morning once, if you remember, with Ronan Kelly from...
Was that Monday morning? Yeah, where even we didn't drink.
We didn't drink, yeah.
And the reason we're doing it on a Tuesday is because we were made aware that our very special guest, who is Charles Miller, who's the CEO of Lynk, which does satellite direct-to-phone technology, was in town because we have a mutual friend of the pod, Mary Clark. And she's got in touch while we were out last Thursday and said, I'm not going to do a Mary Clark impression.
Come on.
She went, Charles is in town, scat. Sorry, Mary. That's presumably as shit as all my other impressions. Except that by this stage she would have said fabulous at least once. And we first heard about Lynk through Mary when she was on the pod a few years ago, pre-pandemic. Everything's pre and post-pandemic. And I remember her, we had it was when she'd finished Synchronos, and she was doing this and that, and she introduced it. And, that was when I first got my head around this satellite direct-to-phone, which we'll get into the specifics of it in a bit.
I've definitely not got my head around it. So.
Yeah, well, there we are. Well, who better to help you get your head around it than the CEO of a company that specialises in it? Yeah. And she was like, he's only around Monday and Tuesday, and so we had a quick check of our incredibly busy diaries, and when we got a window on Tuesday, so did you. So hurrah! So here you are, Charles. You're welcome. It's great to meet you. We've written about you in the past, and I think my colleague Andrew's interviewed you at Mobile World Congress, but it's the first time we've met, so it's great to have you. Oh, and we should give credit to Charles. He brought along some Sierra Nevada clink, which is apparently from where you're from.
My hometown, where I grew up in Chico, California. So
there it is. I can see it on the bottom, Chico, California.
So I told Mary I was going to educate you guys a little bit on American beers, and we'll see how you like it. So.
Yeah.
Whereabouts is Chico? In California?
It's in Northern California, northern Sacramento Valley.
So I remember I lived in San Francisco a long time ago.
Yeah, about 3 hours north of San Francisco.
You could get Sierra Nevada very easily there on draft. And
that's decent, though.
It's good. Yeah.
Good. That's high praise from
I like it. I like it.
It's funny actually. You say that's high praise. I saw something on Twitter the other day where it was a translation of English, the things English people say for Americans. So something like decent, because we tend to be more understated. So something like decent, the translation would have been amazing. Anyway, there's this whole thing, I can't remember it, but it was quite funny whether you look at it from an English or American point of view of our sort of typical understatement. So that's that. So we're going to get into that. But before we get into that, we've got a slight mea culpa. We were thinking of doing a pod last Thursday, but then we realised late in the day that Pierre was out of the country doing half-termy stuff.
You knew that.
Oh, I seem to remember you announcing it fairly late in the day, to be honest, mate. But, we can go there if you want.
No, I said it the week before.
We can take it to HR if you want. I don't mind.
I'm not in London next week, so it was definitely a week before.
It was a week before. Okay, well, that's not that much fucking notice, is it? But then we'd already arranged a lunch for 12 so that we could get it done by 2 and then come and do the pod at the normal start time of 2. But then we thought, well, we're just going to have to try and do it in the studio or not somewhere in the office remotely over Zoom because Pierre wasn't there. And anyway, in the lunch with a PR friend of ours who I've known for years, called Howard Jones, who heads up the comms for an altnet. Although most altnets don't like being called altnets, but anyway, a smaller fibre builder and provider called Hyperoptic in the UK. Lunch was going on all right, and we got to about 2, and Howard was like, "Well, we could just ask for another bottle of wine," and I don't take too much persuading on that. And then we'd arranged to do the Zoom with Pierre at 3, and 3 we still hadn't finished that bottle of wine, and it's still going smoothly. Cut a long story short, we rang up Pierre about 3:30 and went, "It's not going to happen." It was one of those rare examples. I mean, my employers might be listening to this and thinking, "Is this what I pay this fucking bloke for?" But it's one of the rare examples of what used to happen a lot more, which is those lunches that just get a bit out of control. Our mutual friend Mary Clark's very good at those.
All right, getting out of control?
Well, letting a lunch get out of control. No, I should hasten to add, never gets out of control. But she doesn't mind.
Get you in trouble, Scott.
She doesn't mind. She doesn't mind a protracted meal.
Great.
Let's put it that way.
Okay.
And so, it was a rare example of one of those. So just before we get into properly addressing what it is that Charles does for a living, I just thought we'd quickly recap. We thought of doing a whole segment on it, but it's a very UK in the weeds thing, and doesn't really, not something that I think, Charles, you could sort of form an opinion on one way or the other. So I thought I'd just touch it initially, partly because we were talking to Howard about it over lunch and said we'd bring it up. So I didn't want to forget to, which is there was a bit of news a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, that Openreach has got this, which is the UK fixed line wholesaler, owned by BT, the dominant fixed line wholesaler, was looking to lower its wholesale prices through a tariff called Equinox 2. And Ofcom had to have a proper butchers at it. There's another one, English versus American. Do you know what butchers means?
No, I have no idea.
Rhyming slang. It means, look, butcher's hook.
Even lots of Brits wouldn't know that.
Yeah. Oh, butchers is one of the more
country.
Butchers is one of the more common rhyming slang things.
Yeah, but a lot of Cockney rhyming slang is fairly obscure, isn't
fairly obscure. There's one. In fact, I'm not even going to say what it stands for, but it'll be funny. I remember once telling this to a Cockney mate of mine who used to call people a Burke quite a lot.
Right.
And I said, "Do you realise that's actually a lot more offensive than you think it is?" And he's going, "How's that?" And I went, "Well, put it this way, it's derived from Berkeley Hunt."
Yeah.
Not Edmund Burke. Right?
No.
Okay.
So we'll just leave that one there.
Okay.
What you use a lot is whistle.
Well, yeah, whistle and flute suit.
Yeah, you're wearing your whistle today.
Yeah. And what's going on? Oh, yeah. And so...
Equinox 2, Scott.
Yeah, Equinox 2. And so basically the reason it's contentious is anyone who's directly competing with Openreach, which is principally City Fibre, I think. Although I would have thought, I mean, does VMO2 do wholesale?
That's a good question. I'm not sure.
Well, if neither of us know, then I feel all right.
Hyperoptic certainly doesn't do wholesale.
Yeah. Well, so exactly. Cut a long story short, we finally got round, having talked loads of shit, nothing to do with telecoms for a while, to asking Howard what the sort of hyperoptic position was on this Equinox 2, and he was going that they're fairly neutral on it, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Unlike City Fibre, who are really opposed to it.
I think the only danger for a company like Hyperoptic is that it has some impact on retail prices. So if you lower the wholesale prices, and you can theoretically make a bigger profit margin, and does it drive down retail prices? I think Hyperoptic's point is there's not market evidence that that's happened. That when you,
margin boosting
I don't
for the
quite
retailers.
understand that.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, I would have thought there would be a knock-on effect, but he was saying that. That hasn't necessarily happened, and therefore it's not necessarily a bad thing for them. If it did drive down retail costs as well, then it would affect them, obviously.
Yeah.
Because they're not a wholesaler, but they're obviously a retailer. It's got to be one or the other.
So, I thought that was interesting. I kind of assumed that the Hyperoptic's position would be similar to City Fibre's, even though I had to be reminded, because
the City Fibre seems to be the big opponent to it.
That Hyperoptic, it's self-contained. It lays the fibre and it sells it.
Yeah.
Whereas some people only sell it like Sky Broadband or something, and some people only wholesale it like Openreach.
Yeah.
Whereas companies like Hyperoptic have a bit of both. And so City Fibre, they're headed up by an American chap, and he doesn't mind making his voice heard.
Greg Mesh.
Greg Mesh. And so he sends out these sort of quite boisterous press releases saying how out of order it all is.
Yeah.
But there's And he might be right, but there's so much self-interest baked into it that I can't help but take it with a pinch of salt in that particular case.
Well, whether it's right or not depends on whether you're on BT side or the altnet side, kind of. There's not a lot of... There's a bit of middle ground, like hyperoptic, and I think TalkTalk came out with an interesting release saying some of... I shouldn't repeat it because some of it was on background, some of the stuff they put in their email, but...
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know how on background it was, but they seem to be quite neutral on the effects of it, so... But
yeah, I got that same email.
I mean, the retailers, the companies that are buying from OpenReach and likely to be customers of Equinox 2 are obviously going to applaud it. So that's Sky, TalkTalk.
Indeed. It's come to think of it, whether it was on background or official, the TalkTalk aren't going to go, oh God, that's really out of order that we got to pay less.
Yeah.
For our wholesale connectivity. So anyway, that's the real thing I wanted to do, is especially as we bailed out of the pod last Thursday, I wanted to give Howard a shout out, cheers mate, and Hyperoptic a shout out, and just cover that thing. I think it's interesting from a quite in the weeds regulatory point of view, and it wasn't necessarily intuitive to me that a company like Hyperoptic would be quite sanguine about the whole. I
mean, my sort of summary of it would be the worry is that the kind of market worry is that you potentially, reinforce BT's dominant position, and the whole point of having these altnets coming into the market, and it was made quite easy for them, I think, a few years ago, was to sort of have a more competitive broadband market. But maybe all it's done is put pressure on OpenReach to invest, and we end up in a situation where it still has 80 or whatever % of the market.
Well, it obviously needs regulating, because if OpenReach has presumably the scale and the deep pockets to get into a price war to drive competitors out, which I'm not saying it wants to do that, but it could. And that's where we need regulators to keep an eye on this.
I mean, I think the government's priority is to have gigabit everywhere. And as long as they can regulate it and the market sort of works, they're less bothered about there being dozens of altnets up and down the country. But the altnets serve their purpose by getting BT to kind of make those investments.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, terribly rude of us to go on about something that's got absolutely nothing to do with you, Charles. So we'll knock it on the head there. Although, if we get to the end and we feel there's still some business that needs doing on that, we can always come back to it. So, Charles, I've learnt now not to try and introduce people when they know more about what they do than I do. So why don't you just start by telling us who you are, what your job is, and what your company does as a sort of top line thing.
All right, great. Thanks, Scott. So I'm the CEO of Lynk, and that's spelled Lynk. And those of you listening can check us out at our website at lynk.world. And
Lynk.com, are they?
Yeah, someone else has got it. So.
Gutting.
So don't go there.
No.
So
I'm going to.
We have Lynk is figured out a long time ago, 2015, that satellites could actually connect directly to standard ordinary mobile phones. And we figured out over a period of years how to connect to standard ordinary mobile phones without any change of the phone. We had to solve a number of problems, including the fundamental physics of the Lynk budget, that conventional wisdom was wrong, but you could do it. And so we're the world leader in it. We have the world's only patented, proven, and commercially licensed satellite cell towers in space, right? We're operating 3 satellites in orbit today that are commercially licensed to start providing commercial service. We've signed, I think, it's 34 contracts with mobile network operators around the world to provide this service. And last week we had an event with 2 Degrees in New Zealand, and they announced they're rolling out Lynk service to provide universal coverage in all of New Zealand later this year.
You seem to be doing well in New Zealand. I saw a press release today from Spark.
Well, yeah, so I wasn't going to say that. I didn't know it'd come out. So Spark, is going to do it too, right? So,
sorry.
So that's our next, partner. So two MNOs in New Zealand providing it. So we're testing in 24 countries. We've proven this technology on every continent of Earth. We had a NASA scientist go down to Antarctica in December take his glove off in Antarctica and send and receive a text message to space, right, on his mobile phone. And so this is, we're connecting thousands of standard, ordinary mobile phones, no change of the phone, on a daily basis.
Chip.
Not a special chip, no software.
Is there ground equipment that allows you to do that? There's nothing?
No.
Okay.
Well, there's space equipment.
Space equipment.
Space equipment.
Yeah.
It's
your
your mobile phone, and everybody listening to this, you have a mobile phone in your pocket, will work today. Connecting to our satellite. It thinks our satellite is actually a ground-based cell tower. It mimics and is backward compatible with existing 3G PP protocols in the phone. And so this sounds like amazing, claims, but MNOs have been challenging us and testing us. So 2 Degrees did testing in New Zealand, and it worked. Optus in Australia announced that they'd done the testing and worked. Globe in Philippines did it. Rogers, many others have done it. So, most of them have not announced it.
Yep.
But this is working today. So the fundamental engineering and physics works. But it opens up a whole bunch of other questions, right? So this solves a big problem in mobile wireless, which is, you can't, afford to build mobile ground-based cell towers everywhere. The operational costs alone will kill you, right? You'll just be losing money on the power and the backhaul and the maintenance costs. So, satellites are almost all fixed costs. So they're is basically, if you've studied business, it's a really close to zero marginal cost business. So it's going to provide coverage everywhere to everybody.
Just to clarify, by zero marginal cost, because I'm just a journalist, not CEO, I don't necessarily know what these terms. You mean once the sort of capex, the initial cost of getting it and launching it's up there,
right?
That there's very little incremental cost subsequently. Is that what you meant?
Absolutely. So there's
no weather up there.
There's no weather. So let me give you an example. So ground-based cell towers have to pay for electricity and power. It's a major part of the operating costs. Our power is solar cells in space. It's all fixed. We don't pay for it, right? So the backhaul.
Get some good
You'll pay backhaul. In many cases, is operating costs. So it's ours. We provide our own backhaul. It's all fixed. So we have we can always drop the cost, even in emerging markets, to a price they can afford, and we make money.
So you said all that raises lots of other questions, which is obviously what we intend to fire at you over the course of the next hour or so. One thing I should mention is I tried to get onto Lynk.com, and it says 504 gateway timeout.
Well,
they're rubbish then, aren't they?
Whoever owns Lynk.com might be bust, so this might be a time to swoop. If you still fancy that URL.
Right, but
so I just thought I'd point that out.
Yeah, they tend to be very extensive when it's selling you their
Yeah,
website,
they're cyber squatting.
Right, remember that.
Yeah.
Cyber squatters.
What's the sort of genesis of the technology? You're saying that you're the only one that has these patents that allow you to do this, and I mean, are there other people now attempting to do? Because direct to phone from satellite is an expression that's getting used.
Right.
I mean, is there a
well, I
difference
think first of all, I think direct to cell is garbage as a way to describe it. People go, "What's a cell?" Right? People know what the phone is. Well, I have a phone in my pocket. Do you mean direct to that?
Yeah.
So that's for the benefit of everybody out there. If we need to educate the end user, the consumer, like what this is, and if you just confuse them, you do nobody a favor. So sat to phone is by far the best descriptor of what we're doing.
Yep.
Not direct to cell. Like what's that mean?
Because there's no cell tower.
There's no cell involved in this at all.
There's no
but
cell.
Some companies would be doing that. They'd be going to a cell.
So is that a cell tower on the ground? Every satellite.
Are we comparing this to like Starlink, LEO type
right.
stuff?
They put cells on the ground, right?
No, that's different because Starlink has ground-based equipment, don't they? They have satellite dishes, and it's mainly about sort of broadband use.
So I was just wondering what you were comparing it to. If there's another satellite paradigm apart from this direct-to-phone.
I'm wondering if there are other companies doing the same thing.
This is the very fascinating thing. We figured this out in 2015. The origin story is my background. I'm a serial space entrepreneur. I've been in the space industry 30 years. I've seen almost everything. But I was convinced there was a huge inflection point created by Moore's Law and low-cost access to space with small satellites. Kind of like the personal computers in the 70s. When they started building them, nobody knew what they would be used for, right? You guys struggle with this all the time. What's the tech going to be used for? In 1977, personal computers were coming off the assembly line, and people said, What are you going to do with them? Well, you'll play games and maybe put mom's recipes on it, right? That was apocryphal, right, at then, but that was very dated, mom's recipes. It wasn't dad's recipes, but that was the saying. But we figured out all the killer apps later.
Yeah.
So the spreadsheets, word processing,
We always
email.
find a way of using them.
Right. We figured, so I said the same thing's going to happen in small satellites. So I started looking for the killer app for small satellites. And one member of our team, who is her co-founder, Margot Deckard, she was actually doing analysis of the use of satellites in Africa for the Ebola crisis. And was, crazy. It wasn't scalable. It was Inmarsat Beacon terminals. And they're just, you can't give every public health work in Africa a Beacon terminal, right? It's just not affordable.
A Beacon terminal, is that an old school satellite phone?
With the big aerial.
It's actually was DSL speeds, antenna to a satellite in orbit that you could walk in the jungle, put in a backpack.
Right.
And it was just very expensive, not scalable. And we knew that from the start, but she was doing the data analytics, and she saw for the donors who are paying for this that most of the public health workers who were doing this Ebola crisis help were just doing messaging. And she was also an engineer as well as an emergency responder. And she came back and said, if we just lower the data rate, maybe we can collect directly to a phone.
So they were getting DSL rates, but they didn't need it.
They didn't use it. It was like... most of them were just, 80, 90% of them were just doing messaging only in the middle of the jungle in Africa. And you could do everything you wanted with messaging, right? You could say, this is how many people I tested today, how many had it, we need blankets, we need these medicines, this is how much, it all can be a message.
How long ago was this? When this
was in late 2014.
Okay.
So she was doing, then she came and said, hey, do you think you could connect to a phone? And I went to our engineer, other co-founder, Ty, and who invented a lot of the key technology that we're going to talk about. And I asked him, Ty, what do you think? Can you connect a satellite to a phone? And he looked at me, he goes, there is no way you can do that. Right. So we, it's like
it's not a good start then.
Right,
I thought you were going to say, there's nothing I cannot do.
Yeah.
He said, there's no way.
He said, don't ever question me again.
So I looked at him and I go, why not? Right? And he kind of grumped at me. Well, I'll show you. I'll go do the Lynk budget, and and you'll see. And he came back. And so this is the fascinating thing. The internet exists.
Tail between his
so
legs.
he was a satellite guy, worked at JPL. He knew the satellite stuff great. He just didn't know the link margins and gains of everything in the mobile phone. But that's all on the internet now. So he connected the dots. He put together the entire Lynk budget, and he came back and he goes, I was wrong. You actually can connect two ways. It's easy to go the downlink from the satellite, you just increase the power and broadcast, but you can't change the phone, right? No extra power, same really small antenna in the phone. Can you connect the uplink? And the answer was yes, you could. And so that's where we start in 2015 when that analysis that this is something that nobody in the world knew, that you really could do this. And we set about, took us a couple years to figure out how do you do this without any change of the phone. So that took us 2 more years, and that led to the
Which seems
patents
absolutely critical, because, the amount of extra churn and obstacles and that sort of thing that would get involved in trying to persuade chipset makers or handset makers to incorporate your technology is a completely different
Right. No hardware
isn't it?
change. It has to use the existing radio chips in the phone. No software change. How do you do that? We figured that all out over the next 2 years, and that's when we set up a separate company.
Do you need bigger ears on the satellite?
So, you need to have a bigger antenna in the satellite. How you do that? You had to, convince yourself that how you do that was, that was existing technology. You didn't have to invent new technology. You didn't need some humongous satellite. And the truth is if you knew your engineering, your satellite engineering, your physics, you could start with, relatively smaller satellites. We have a 1 meter by 1 meter phase array antenna. That's good enough to start with.
It's like this table.
A little bit bigger than this table, but not that big, right? So it's totally within the realm of a possibility, and you have to be really, care about physics, right? You cannot lie to the universe and just hand wave. A lot, there's a lot of hand waving going on in this industry as well as the satellite industry, but reality will bite you. You cannot fool reality. So you have to start with first principles, and that's what we did.
So the next stage after this, sort of after he'd come round to realizing it could be done and gone and looked at the internet, and it was actually then about designing a satellite from scratch.
So the next two big challenges. How do you use existing radios in the satellite without changing? So we invented what the reverse of ATC with complementary space component, we called it, which is you use existing ground-based spectrum, but you fill in the black spots, putting beams down from space in 3 dimensionals without causing harmful interference. We figured out how you could do that in theory, right? In about 2016. In theory, we had to prove that later. We proved it to the FCC.
So this is using regular spectrum that's used for cellular comms.
Yeah.
Be using it for your use case and not interfering with...
interfering. So the key insight here is that existing ground-based towers actually overlap and interfere with each other a little bit, but they allow it if you follow the power flux density and the overlapping cell that you're beaming into doesn't exceed a threshold of the power flux density limits. You can do the same thing from space, and as long as you don't exceed those limits, you're using the same rules to prevent harmful interference, and that's what we've been doing. You can put down a beam from space, and it's just changing 2-dimensional thinking to 3-dimensional thinking.
This is ringing a bell. Maybe I sort of forget these things. Part of it's my age, and part of it's being a journalist. You sort of cover stuff and then forget about it.
Or maybe it's the drinking the beer.
And it could be. I'm sure drinking the beer sort of complicates the previous two things that I was talking about. But I got a feeling that we might have had like a Zoom interview or something in the past.
We've talked about this in the past.
Yeah. I know you probably remember better than me.
Yeah, but you need to repeat it a few times.
And one thing that's sort of jogging my addled brain is you talking about getting FCC or other regulatory sign off on some of this technology.
Right.
Which I think around that time you were expecting.
Well, they thought we were crazy at the start when we came in and started talking to them, and I think it was 2018. It's like, we could do this. They're saying, you can do what? And we started explaining it, and so we just kept on talking to them. They gave us, and then they eventually gave us an experimental license, said, prove it, don't cause harmful interference. We did it. We were monitored by major U.S. MNOs that we weren't knocking people off the network. And over a period of years, we proved it not only in theory, but empirically that you could do this without causing harmful interference. Put down a beam in existing spectrum already in the phones and provide a useful service. So, and then the FCC was tracking this all the time, and building that trust, we're not just BS artists, right? We're actually doing it, right? This is, we think is critical, but the FCC came around and gave us the world's first commercial license for sat to phone last September, right? So the world's only commercially licensed sat to phone provider in the world today.
And yet I've heard, again, I'm having to sort of dig through the cobwebs of my memory. I've heard of other providers of this sort of thing. Like, we've had announcements which you'll obviously be acutely aware of. There was an Apple one a little while ago.
The Apple one's with Globalstar, isn't it? How would that be different in terms of the technology? Because as I understand it, it apparently works with my phone, which
right.
is 14.
Well, they had to add a chip to your phone that uses the Globalstar spectrum.
Okay.
Right. So first of all, it's wonderful. It's going to be a life-saving service. You hear stories about it. So, but it's really the Globalstar network. It's 24 satellites at a very high LEO orbit, 1,400 kilometers. It's great for them. It's much better business for them. They've been struggling. Good friends over there. We really like the Globalstar folks, but it's limited, extremely limited in capacity and speed. It takes about, according to Apple, 20 seconds pointing at the sky. Very, very limited use case. It's to every extent we can see, it's one-way communications, maybe validates that the the emergency alert got through, but the emergency responder can't send you back in a question and say, and ask you questions, right? At least now, it's not two-way communication. So it's very limited speeds. So it's limited to
So it's just like an SOS signal.
It's an SOS signal, and it's great. So that should be, but it's so much more is possible by this. And so Lynk saw this way, 6 years ago. He said, we don't want to just do that. Our ultimate vision, which is hard, but all the engineering economics is there, is the end use case is everywhere, everyone connectivity, broadband speeds. And when I say broadband, I'm talking maybe ultimately 10 megabits a second.
Okay.
Everywhere on the planet. right?
But forgive me for butting in, you're pretty short of that. You're not,
the physics and the economics support it, but it's not there immediately. You got to incrementally step up. Just like you went from 2G to 3G to 4G to 5G.
Totally.
We will get faster and faster speeds.
So
Everything in the engineering and economics and the physics allows us to get there.
And what? Yeah, and this is fine. I mean, this is something I wanted to ask you about, and it leads on to it. But also, I'll stress that I completely get your point about Rome wasn't built in a day,
right,
and all that sort of thing. But what is the kind of bandwidth we're talking about currently?
Well, the existing satellites we have up there can do within a beam have a really limited. You're limited by the capacity per beam, right? To that you put on the ground. And so you have to share that capacity. So if we're doing 5 to 15 megabits a second, assuming we have 10 by 10 megahertz of LTE, tell me how much bandwidth we have. That limits it. So assuming conventional LTE 10 by 10 megahertz, we're doing maybe average of 10 megabits a second, 15 megabits a second in the beam, but you have to share that, right? So if you give one person 10 megabits, that you're knocking everybody else off, right?
Yep.
So that's one reason you start from messaging, not because you can't technically do it, right? But it's because you want to make sure you share this capacity as widely as possible. If someone dies because you
watching
gave
Netflix,
watching Netflix, and everybody else is knocked off, can't get on, someone dies because they can't send a message. That's on you.
And your point about messaging, because when I first learnt about this, I was like, oh, okay, so it's not like proper mobile broadband. But it does occur to me, and certainly watching like how my kids use their phones. You were talking about, back in emergency use in Africa, people don't ring each other up anymore. So most of the times, interpersonal communication is by messaging these days.
My kids don't know how to answer a phone.
No.
They send WhatsApp videos.
And every now and then, like someone like my dad will ring me up out of the blue, or Strandy.
Yeah, it's very old-fashioned.
And it's already a given that I grew up at a time when I was ringing up my mates on a landline when I was, when I was in my teens or whatever. It already feels jarring for someone to just ring you up out of the blue.
It does,
ring up at your door and announce.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, what we do at work, for example, is we'll go, is now a good time to talk, and then you'll
you
ring them up.
What needs to happen though to get the bandwidth up and ensure that you're not running into constraints as the user base grows? Do you need to produce new satellites that are more sophisticated, or the ones that are already up there, can they be kind of adjusted by software?
So first of all, we are starting in UHF. We're existing spectrum in the phone from like 700 to 960. We can actually do 617 to 960, but the market is kind of telling us, well, we don't care about the 600 megahertz. But all our MNO partners are really in the 700 to 960 band, and so all those 34 contracts are starting there. But we eventually will go into other bands, but we just have to do a small tweak to our satellite. You can't do a software-defined phase array antenna and take the hardware elements out. At least I don't know how to do that. No one's doing that yet. So you have to tune the hardware to the general area in the spectrum you want. But we can build another version of our cell towers in space with higher frequency. We were talking to lots of partners about L band or S band or C band. That we could do that. So we think eventually it goes there. That takes longer. It's more expensive.
Letter bands.
It's just higher frequencies. That's what they do. Yeah, that's satellite guys do.
They get used more in satellite, don't they? The letter things than they do in the sort of.
I was writing something up the other day, and they're talking about these letter bands.
So L band is between 1 and 2 gigahertz, and S band is a 2 plus, and then C band is kind of 3 plus, gigahertz.
Which is the only one that I'm aware of that sort of gets used in a terrestrial.
See, that's the other thing that's annoying. It's not sequential. What we go from L to S. What happened to MNOP?
Right.
I mean. Come on, everyone.
Someone messed that up a long time ago. So, but that eventually happened. But as you guys know, it's hard to get all the phone makers to add the spectrum to their phone. So we think that eventually happens, that you'll convert more and more spectrum to this. We think the demand is so large and the public benefit is so large that you persuade over time, moving. Now, the hard part is all the... and I'll use it, LS and C band companies that have that spectrum are all saying, me, and and that confuses people. So it's to be worked out who's next. And Lynk is talking to all these different companies, and we'll build a version of our satellite. We're going to start with UHF. It's in every phone around the world.
Yeah.
Start with what people need, but over time we'll add an L or S or C, and we think eventually it may be all the above, right? So it's the same thing in the ground networks. You have low band, mid band, and high band. You'll have that in space too. That creates more capacity, more speed, and more resiliency and redundancy.
Presumably, as you go up spectrum, just like you do with regular cellular stuff, you get the sort of propagation challenges. I mean, there must be a frequency above which clouds are an issue. Presumably.
Well, yeah, the higher frequencies you go, the more water moisture impacts you. UHF is great.
Yeah, exactly.
Ka band really sucks at dealing with storms and water in the atmosphere. So that it is an issue. So, but the higher frequencies are smaller cells. So, which is more capacity per square mile? Would you put the same capacity in a smaller cell? But they use more power. So there's all these trade-offs. Right.
So the services that you've already the deals that you've announced with 2 Degrees, isn't it, and Spark.
Right.
In the first instance, the people who are using that, what would they be doing with it? Is it going to be very much a kind of text messaging service?
We absolutely think, and our MNO partners agree, you start with messaging, that for people who have nothing, messaging is infinitely better than nothing. So you start there. People are willing to pay for messaging. You guys probably remember back in 2012, before WhatsApp and iMessage disrupted messaging and started forcing MNOs to give away for free. It was a huge business.
Yeah, SMS.
It was $200 billion a year for messaging
and
revenue.
You'd get a certain fixed number of texts as part of your contract, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
I think it's unlimited.
Can you imagine keeping count and going, oh, shit,
now
I'm
it's like
unlimited.
on my 99th text this month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
They don't give it, throw it away now, don't they?
yeah.
And that's two-way. That's proper two-way messaging.
Yeah.
So the issue with Globalstar, just to be clear in my own mind, is that you can only sort of send a signal up to the satellite.
So far, one way, and it's really limited because they actually have to go through some menu of saying what your emergency is, and they put a very low data rate code up saying what you answered. So it's really not a full SMS, even one way. It's so limited.
It's like a little menu system. And I know you're not in any way denigrating their offering.
I love it. I think it's made what we've done very credible. That Apple and others have come in.
Yeah, the concept
back
of direct to phone. That makes
in
it more
2017, when we started talking to people thought we were crazy. Said, "Oh, you can't do that."
Yeah,
this guy's been spending too much time in space. They thought.
Presumably, the chip in the iPhone 14 that allows you to do this is tailored to Globalstar's system.
That's what he said,
okay, sorry.
Yeah,
come on, mate. Try and keep up.
It's a beer.
By the way, just tuck into those. I don't want to nick all the Sierra Nevadas because I want to give Charles a fair crack at it.
Are there people actually using it at the moment? Has anything been launched, or is it we sort of pre-launch in terms of consumers actually on a service where you've had people sending text messages and it's used your 3 satellites?
Well, our MNO partners have been testing it.
Yep.
And they're getting ready to roll it out. They're figuring out their go-to-market strategies. 2 Degrees in New Zealand is kind of announced their go-to-market strategy. They have billboards all over New Zealand talking about no giant wait, emphasizing that Lynk is coming in 2023, that we're years ahead of everybody else. It's great that a bunch of people are jumping in, but again, we're years ahead of everybody else, and our MNO partners see that. And 2 Degrees has made that part of their the go-to-market strategy.
Why are the Kiwis so keen on your stuff?
Well, 50% of New Zealand has no connectivity, and then that's just the land. If you go out on, there's a huge amount of boaters in New Zealand. A large percentage of the Kiwis go out in maritime, and that's a big problem, right? So this is your mobile phone. It's going to keep you connected out on the water.
And they do crazy adrenaline sports where you might run into problems. So, you're doing bungee jumping,
swan diving off a cliff,
things like that. So
and you're so halfway down, you can just text, "Oh shit."
Yeah.
A huge mistake.
Yeah.
Here in the UK, our research is that Scotland probably has the most disconnectivity. Right. That would probably be the biggest use of what we're doing.
Right. So
we've been testing here in the UK. We've Ofcom has been very supportive. The UK Space Agency has given us a little bit of funding to develop some of the use cases for this. So it's been
we're good at handing out small amounts of funding.
Are they sort of, with 3 satellites, do you have connectivity issues at the moment? I mean, is there a moment when you have to be within,
So it's periodic.
Satellite
We
kind
need
of
about
thing,
1,000 satellites for continuous service.
Right.
So part of the solution here is you bring the satellites down in low Earth orbit, and they have a much smaller field of view. You're closing the link two ways, but you have a smaller field of view, and these satellites are passing over the Earth like painting, the Earth looks like a ball of yarn. Eventually, every satellite covers every part of the Earth, but only a little bit at a time. So it's periodic.
So it's like a grid on the outside.
And you need about 1,000 to have continuous service.
Right.
Right. Now, the insight here is you don't have to wait like OneWeb and Starlink to get the whole network up to start a service. You can start doing messaging, because messaging is mostly asynchronous. You put out a message, you forget about it, maybe 30 minutes later, 15 minutes later, you get a message back. You don't even think about it, right? So it works well for messaging. It sucks for voice or broadband. It's like your broadband or voice went on for 2 minutes and went out for 15 minutes. That would suck.
Okay.
So even though we could do it, that's just a bad user experience. So we'll wait till we have continuous service and we'll turn those on.
So, and you've got 3 satellites now?
We have 3.
Only 997 to go.
Yeah, but we have the only 3 in the world. Yeah. So we'll go through 4, 15, 100, 200.
So what's the rollout schedule though? Because it's quite ambitious to go from 3 to 1,000.
Right. So it's mostly limited by raising capital.
I was going to say this is a patient capital game.
Right. This is a patient capital game. So it's we've proven the tech, we've proven the business. We have the only license. We have the patent. So we just add private capital and repeat, right?
So a lot of your work is talking to investors at the moment to raise the funding for it.
But we've solved all the hard parts, and it's a huge, market, right? In a $1 trillion industry, right? And so, we have a lot of interest from investors.
And the startup capital, can you say where that's come from, or is that kind of confidential to get you going?
Right. Well, it's the same traditional that every entrepreneur, you start with seed capital, you start talking to more later stage venture capital, and then you get into more growth stage capital and private equity funds.
Is that where they talk about Series B and...
Yeah. You've never done that?
I've never started.
You never started a business?
No. What do you think, Charles?
Well, this podcast is kind of like a project business.
Well, we like to think we're a little startup within Informa, don't we?
Right.
Well, actually, I don't think we've ever said that. So. But now we like to think it. Now you bring it up.
But you're not. But just on the 1,000 satellites, that's not is that the end game to have 1,000?
Well, we have filed for 5,000 satellites. So at any time you'll have at least 5 satellites over your head. That adds more capacity and speed. The real limit on and it's the same thing for ground-based cell towers as well as Wi-Fi, but less so, is every cell tower is capacity limited. And there is so much demand out there with 5 billion mobile phones in the world and the disconnectivity that it just swamps the capacity. That's why you have to do messaging to share the capacity, right? Until we get up to a certain level, we'll have to limit what people can do. And ultimately, we'll be building bigger, faster satellites step by step and more satellites. And we will, serve all the capacity that's in the world for broadband services everywhere. But it's really straightforward, scaling the engineering step by step, making a profit every step of the way, building the next generation that's bigger, better, faster, step by step, in a virtuous cycle.
Is your sort of revenue stream, I mean, I know it's probably early days for that, but is it similar with the relationship between Apple and Globalstar? It's like a sort of a one-off kind of fee, or do you get sort of you get a recurring?
Well, I'm not sure about the Apple and Globalstar business. It's not totally clear. I don't think they've announced that. But in our cases, we are wholesale only. We only do partnership with MNOs. Yeah. We never go direct to consumers. There's other companies that have jumped in and are clearly direct to consumer plays. They're going to try to take subscribers away from MNOs. But our whole strategy is to only partner with mobile network operators. They do a great job with their customers. We will never do a great job. We cannot understand the needs of subscribers in the UK or New Zealand or Africa or Latin America. So we just want to be a great partner for MNOs, wholesale only.
So it strikes me a big part of your pitch is that said MNO can really augment their coverage narrative. Mm-hmm. And so, with an asterisk at the end.
Yeah.
Like, if you're on some remote Scottish island don't expect to be sort of streaming Netflix onto your phone.
Not yet.
But what they can say, we often get these stats thrown at us. We've got 99% coverage, and then it always has to be qualified as a population coverage or geographical coverage. And so this will really help them with their geographical coverage thing.
And they never say, well, the 99% coverage is how many of those 99% have traveled into a remote area and are disconnected right now. They never talk to you about that. Right. So everybody knows that people go into these remote rural areas and are disconnected. We know. We put down beams over the UK with the permission of Ofcom, and we see parts of even in London where phones are asking for a connection to our satellite because they're disconnected at the moment. They would never ask. And so there's disconnection all over
I am
the
sometimes
UK.
shocked by not spots within London.
Yeah.
You're like, what the fuck is going on?
I had bad reception by the center point. And I was like, I'm in the middle of the map.
Yeah.
Right. And maybe your phone is one that tried to connect to our satellite in one of our tests.
He is on 3 though, so his hopes can't ever be too high.
But someone wouldn't know, I suppose, if they're trying to connect to your
They wouldn't.
They wouldn't see anything.
Right. Our satellite goes through the process, says, "Oh, you haven't paid up your fee, go away." But we'll complete the registration process.
And the incentive for MNOs to do it is literally just to have a better service, or do some of them that have been in talks, do you see an opportunity to charge a bit more for this and
it's
extra
both.
money?
So there's some of them that want to charge a premium service.
Right.
And so we do a revenue share arrangement with them, and they split the revenue. And then there's some of them want to just give it away to their subscribers and not worry about it and have every subscriber. Now, they pay us a usage fee, but the reason they're doing it is they're going to take subscribers from the other guy, right?
Yeah.
They're going to, that's how they're going to make their money.
Yeah, it's just throwing it into the mix. Have some of those questions you've been asking been Teresa's ones?
I hope so.
So I should give a shout out. I was going to say we haven't acknowledged Teresa. We've got someone in the background, which is Teresa, our colleague, specifically works on light reading. But we're all one big happy family, isn't it?
She can't say because she's not on a microphone. But are they some of your questions? She's nodding.
She's
so,
nodded.
Yeah, okay.
Just because I know, because Ian shared them before we started, and there were a lot of excellent questions.
Teresa came out with all the questions, and I went, those are really good questions.
Okay.
I hadn't thought of any of this stuff.
You're just the talent, right?
He's just
You're
the talent.
I don't know if I'm that either, but I'm just a guy who drinks beer on the pod.
He's an actor.
Good, because I was wondering, because I've got a slight, still on the same subject, but I've got a slight different direction I wanted to go in, but I wanted to see if you...
Well, I was going to ask a couple... I was going to ask one or two more. I was going to ask if you could see this going... I mean, do the laws of physics prohibit this, or is there a potential for this to be a Netflix streaming service in the future in remote areas that aren't served?
Well, this is the issue. So if you're in an area where that has very little population, and, we're putting down a beam in a very small area that's got 20 or 30 megabits a second, or 50 or 100 megabits a second with more band. It depends on the bandwidth we're allowed. But if you're out on a desert island, we can use 100 megabits of bandwidth, and we can give you amazing service, right? Yeah. And you're the only one there, and you get it all, right? So the answer is really it depends.
Yeah.
And this is another reason for MNO partnerships. They know their local circumstances better than we do, and they will figure out which service to offer, right? So the less density you have, the better service you'll get, right? And because you get more of that bandwidth from the cell. But if you're right on the edge of a populated area outside the suburbs, there'll be more people out there naturally. They'll probably have to share that capacity with whatever they have at that moment. And over time, the capacity per square mile will go up because we'll be adding, again, L, S, and C bands or other frequencies, so it's smaller cells that have more density, right? We'll be adding capacity. The answer will change, and more services will come on. But I suspect that Netflix will be something that will be the last thing ever you get.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a real first world problem. I'm on a desert island. I can't get fucking Netflix.
I don't think it's a first world problem. That's exactly what you want to do on a desert island because you've got nothing else to do.
I was just picturing, actually, when Charles was talking about this sort of having to fight over the bandwidth, a sort of Lord of the Flies situation on this desert island.
A neighbour moves in and be like,
yeah.
How'd you get your internet?
So you go,
don't ask questions.
In a terrible tragedy, it appears he was killed because he was hugging the bandwidth. Yeah. Sorry, I've still got my tangent, but let me finish your stuff.
Well, and the altitude of the satellites, this is LEO stuff we're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, has this killed the business case for GEO, all the sort of LEO things that have come along recently?
No, I think there's use cases for GEO that's different. They are being kind of disrupted already. Every GEO satellite company now is trying to figure out their LEO strategy. But there are some advantages of GEO over LEO. But LEO is kind of, clearly eating their cake.
GEO's presumably got a bigger area of coverage for each satellite.
They can have one satellite put down beams over a big area and just have all those beams be allocated. And so I eventually think there'll be a mix. Everybody's struggling to figure out what that mix is. It's not 100% sure what it is, but all of the big GEO operators, are coming in to try to figure out their LEO strategies. Some of them have bought. OneWeb got bought, right? Yep. And so others...
In part by the UK government.
Yeah.
Which is weird.
It is weird.
Right? Well, the UK actually bought in, and then, Eutelsat bought them and has kind of pulled them away from the UK government, right? Because they want to go after the Gen 2 OneWeb system. Looks like it may turn into the European Union broadband satellite system, which is UK golden share is kind of like, may not bear much weight.
We really need someone who knows what they're doing on satellite, because I miss so much of this.
Yeah. Well, it's useful. That's why we get people on. We don't claim to know what we're talking about.
But the economics are just a lot. What is it that's kind of propelled LEO recently? Is it sort of scientific breakthroughs, or the economics make a lot more sense than GEO? And because it's perceived to have come after.
First of all, frequent access to space and getting things up more frequently and more reliably have been a key issue. The advance, it's two inflection points going on. It's both lower cost, frequent access to space. And the other one really is Moore's Law coming to satellites, that the small satellites in low Earth orbit are much more capable than they were. You can do things with a small satellite today that a decade ago was the size of a minibus and 2 decades ago was a school bus, right? So those inflection points are coming to space.
I always like that illustration of I suppose Moore's Law, that all our phones, we've got more power than powered the sort of
the Apollo
land.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sort of thing. Yeah, it's crazy.
So those things are coming. So it's a big breakthrough, and there's many different benefits of space that are coming to everybody. In this, I'm convinced Sat to Phone, for those who are in the space and satellite industry, and I've been talking about this, is going to become the largest category in space and satellite. Really, because it's not really a space or satellite business, it's a mobile wireless business, which is a $1 trillion industry, and it solves a problem in a much larger industry. And the insight here I share with satellite people is there's 3 categories of satellite services that actually billions of people use. One is GPS, right? You position, everybody with a smartphone uses GPS, whether they know it or not. Many don't know it. But the reason you can do an Uber, your position or, on the map is because of GPS. And where right? A lot of people don't even know that. So the other one...
commonly used service as well, because people use it for maps all the time.
But the key insight, billions use it, but nobody...
Not as much as you should.
Right? Nobody pays for it, right?
Yep.
The government gives away for free.
Yep.
So it's not a great business. Same thing for weather. Billions of people use weather, like what's the weather going to be in the next several days, but nobody pays for that weather. Very few people do, right? Some businesses might do some analytics for crop growing, but nobody has a phone, gets on their weather app and pays a fee for that, right?
Yeah.
So it's billions use it, nobody pays for it. So this is going to be the first service that's in the phone. Billions will use it, and they'll pay for it, right? People pay for mobile wireless. Now, they'll pay less in other countries than they in developed versus developing, right? But they're willing to pay something. And so the insight here that is completely changes what previous satellite industry, companies do. The marginal cost for sat to phone services is basically zero. So our satellites in low Earth orbit will be passing over every country on the planet. We might as well turn on the beam. That costs us nothing. And provide a service, and whatever those subscribers and citizens can pay and afford, the local pricing, we will provide that service at that price. So we'd be throwing the capacity away, and it costs us nothing to do that. And whatever the local price is, it'll be affordable to them, and they'll get a service. So that zero marginal cost is a critical thing to understand why this is a big
especially
deal.
with using solar panels and stuff.
Yep.
Can I ask one more thing?
Go on then. Then shut up.
All right. What's the lifespan of these LEO satellites? I mean, is there a time when they have to be taken out of service?
Right. So they're designed for a 7-year lifetime.
Right.
Other satellites are designed for 15 years and go 20 years. But that's wasteful spending just to make a satellite, particularly when you're leveraging Moore's Law, last 15 years. So when we're building satellites for 7 years, probably we'll operate them for about 5 years and then retire them because
How'd you do that? How'd you go up and get them?
Oh, well,
They send Charles up in a spaceship.
Because he knows all about space.
well, I used to have a satellite
Use that with a
servicing
hook.
company, so I know how to do it. But we'll just have propulsion on the satellites and deorbit them over the South Pacific, and they'll burn up in the atmosphere.
Okay.
And just to be clear, if they died, they're in a one of the benefits to being very low LEO. We call it a self-cleaning orbit. Right, the atmosphere is actually there; it's tenuous. If you die in about a year or two, it deorbits, naturally anyway. So it cleans
Whereas
itself.
up at Geo, it just sits there being space junk.
Yeah, it's a big
Right.
problem. And
So-
even higher LEO, they have satellites that are up there that died,
They're still floating around.
that they're flying around for many, many decades and cause problems. The Iridium Cosmos crash between a Russian satellite and Iridium was a dead satellite, right? Crashing each other caused a big problem.
Okay.
I'm going to get completely out of my
chain
comfort
reaction.
zone here.
So I have a
Yeah, go
question too. So those 997 satellites that you plan to launch, who's going to launch it?
Well, right now we're launching on SpaceX. They're the most affordable company in the world, and launching frequently. They just had their 200th launch in a row.
Yeah.
They're the most reliable, most affordable in the
Seems
world.
to be what you were talking about earlier about how space is more accessible. That's presumably a big part of it.
They've been launched. You're doing launches per week now, right? So on occasion, you get launches per day, a couple launches a day. SpaceX is doing amazing things. This inflection point is continuing. There's a bunch of companies building reusable launch vehicles, and we're going to go to launches per day. And knock on wood, in our lifetime, I'm predicting it's not in the next 5 or 10 years, but maybe 20 years, you get launches per hour.
Is it a lot less expensive to launch something into low Earth orbit than geostationary?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, because of the amount of propulsion
Right,
needed to get that.
It's like, just as a rule of thumb, it's about twice, maybe 3 times the cost to get the same mass to GEO.
How high is GEO then normally? What sort of altitude are we
It's
talking?
25,000 miles. So,
And LEO's like 10.
so you're thinking, well, where our satellites is about 300 miles
Oh, right. Okay.
above the Earth.
Wow, okay.
But kilometers, if you want to do in kilometers, 500
That's
kilometers.
really low.
So.
Actually, while I'm getting out of my depth on space talk, when you were talking about LEO being did you describe it as a self-cleaning?
Self-cleaning orbit.
Yeah,
if you go low enough. Yeah.
So does that mean it's, and I don't know if I'm using this term right, does that mean it's a decaying orbit?
Well, yes, because the tenuous atmosphere is up there, and that you're hitting the atmosphere slowly. It decays the orbit.
So there's drag or something.
Yeah, it's drag. Yeah, that's a
drag.
good thing. There's some drag. It's very light, but over time it builds up, and you start coming down, and it gets more and more drag and more and more
So
drag.
does that mean that you need some kind of propulsion to keep it in orbit, or the amount of time it takes coincides with the lifespan?
We will
of
have
the satellite?
propulsion, yes, to keep them in orbit. And you want propulsion to move it around. You want propulsion to deorbit at the end of life anyway, right? So that's
It's a like a tank, I guess, and that's finite. Like there's no
yeah. But you build the tank large enough to handle all your needs for the lifetime of the satellite for those 7 years.
You can't get the propulsion running off solar energy. We're not that clever yet.
No, we know how to do that.
Yeah. But
Right.
were you talking about a tank? Were you talking about fuel?
Isn't it?
So there's many different propulsion technologies, and Lynk is studying a lot of them. And but you use some would be chemical. You could do nuclear. Nobody's doing that right now. But solar
PR
electric propulsion is there's a bunch of solar electric propulsion companies operating. There's satellites in orbit today that use solar, but there's lots of different flavors of.
Does that still like
rust.
heat up water and spews water out? Like,
That's one of many dozens of different ways you could do propulsion. You could heat up water. You can heat up other types of chemicals.
like what comes out the back, you know?
Yeah. The higher the velocity it comes out, the better efficiency you get. Yeah.
Your talk about SpaceX gave me the segue to bring up the thing that I want to ask about. Because obviously SpaceX is run by Elon Musk, and so is Starlink.
Yeah.
That's what it's called, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I was just wondering about your competitive positioning versus LEO players like Starlink, like OneWeb, and there are others that don't spring immediately to mind. Maybe you could tell me. They get obviously a lot more publicity. Elon Musk's got most Twitter followers of everyone in the world. He get publicity just going to the toilet.
Right.
So how do you in terms of your business and your competitive positioning and your strategy, how do you compare yourselves both in terms of how you communicate with the business like MNOs and then also to the outside world with the likes of Starlink and OneWeb?
So let's be clear. So Starlink and OneWeb are, backhaul, Wi-Fi backhaul to a user terminal, right? So that's a completely different category. That's for people who can afford the $500, and now it's bigger. It's it used to be $500, now $550 or $600 upfront
For the
fee,
dish.
and then $110 a month. Right, it's
That's quite a lot.
subsidized price. That dish costs a lot more than that, so they subsidize it and they make it up on the payments. You'll sign a long-term
Subscription.
contract.
Right.
So people in the UK and Europe and United States can afford that, but not many other people. So, but that doesn't compete with us. They're competing against, Intelsat, Inmarsat, and a bunch of Viasat, Hughes, a bunch of other satellite companies for broadband. It's really non-mobile. You put a dish on your roof, right? And so you can't put the dish in your pocket, right? And so what you want is your phone to stay connected. So it's a completely different category. It's just Wi-Fi, more available Wi-Fi in remote areas. And it's really non-mobile. Now they're doing more and more non-mobile, but those dishes are even more expensive. And you can put them on your boat and other things. But so that's different. Now, since there's probably people out there listening, SpaceX jumped into our category last year and announced that they're going to do the same.
That rings a bell.
So, they want to do it all. It's really acknowledging that some of the best companies in the world are saying that we're going to, me too. So we're years ahead. And
Say what you want about Musk, he doesn't lack ambition.
He doesn't lack ambition.
So he would do it on the same satellites, would he? Or he would need to do...
No, he's going to do his own satellites.
Right, but not the Starlink ones that are already kind of there.
Well, he might mix them. Their announcement that they're going to add the regular Starlinks and add another antenna that unfolds out of it to do sat to phone.
Right. Okay.
Right. So they haven't done it yet, and they're quite a ways from doing it, but they've applied for a license to do it.
Right.
And they've declared they're doing a hybrid strategy. They've have some MNO partnerships. They've also announced at Mobile World Congress Americas last year, a SpaceX person got on the stage and announced they're going direct to consumer. So Elon is a direct to consumer guy. So he's kind of, that's something for MNOs to consider, right? This is direct to consumer.
Challenging the MNO business
right.
model,
So.
basically.
He's going to do both, and that's what he is. He disrupted banks, PayPal. He disrupted car companies. He cut out
Tesla's direct to consumer. Isn't it?
it's direct to consumer, and even Starlink he doesn't sell through ISPs. He sells direct.
He's not
to
a big
consumer.
fan of the channel, Elon.
He does. He hates the channel. He's like, why the hell would I let them participate in this?
Yeah. Should be about me. He's coming over as a bit megalomaniacal.
Right, and so they.
It's all about me.
You talk about Twitter, but there's there's a method to his madness with Twitter. It's his channel to do the direct to consumer business.
Yeah, of course.
Oh yeah, well we've had chats about that. We'll see where we go, but it's not germane to this conversation. But
he brags about free marketing, but actually the marketing cost him $40 billion, right? So.
Oh yeah, no, I mean I think even he has openly admitted that he massively overpaid for Twitter. In fact, I think he was trying to.
Well, he had to in the end, didn't he?
He was being a bit too much of a smart ass. I think he came out with some figure. I think part of the figure was linked to this thing they talk about in the States to do with smoking ganj. There's some date in the year for smoking dope.
No, 420. That's when he wanted to take Tesla public years ago.
No, he got on a
420?
podcast, and he smoked.
Yeah, that was the Rogan thing. Anyway, I think part.
But
of
you guys don't do that. We just drink beer here.
we don't approve of anything illegal on this pod. It would be asking a bit much of our employers for us to skin up a fat doob.
I don't think we get away with that one.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, that was a bit of a tangent, wasn't it?
I was going to ask another thing about all the other sort of satellite options that are out there. What's Project Kuiper all about?
It's a follow-on kind of duplicate of OneWeb and Starlink with an antenna.
So the Amazon one.
It's Amazon, they have Amazon has over 1,000 people working on it, and they're talking about launching their first satellite later this year. Amazon it's hugely competitive, and so they've bought a bunch of launches, and they're talking about building and launching thousands. They have a license for thousands of these, and it's competition. It's going to drive down the price.
Yeah,
this is good for everybody.
And they want to do direct to phone as well. Is that their plan?
No, we haven't heard anything about that. Okay. So they might, but I don't know that.
Okay,
right? I haven't heard.
It's more in the kind of sort of must-buy satellite dish and.
Right now they have their hands full. They announced many years ago they still haven't launched their first satellite. So I think they have to probably pay attention and to do what they've already, chew what they've already bought off, which is right.
Well, why do you think there's so much interest? Because we've talked about this before on the pod about satellites, that it's a relatively small percentage of the population that is not covered.
Needs it.
And as you just said, in markets outside, the US and the UK where we can afford these expensive dishes.
Well, I don't understand. So the truth is, so the the broadband satellite business, a year or two ago, I haven't seen the latest numbers, 3 million people, right? That's 3 orders of magnitude lower than the 5 billion people who have a mobile phone, right? Yeah. So I don't understand it. But it was the best thing that satellite space people could think about, right? So that, between Amazon and OneWeb and Starlink, maybe they get the 3 million up to 5 million. I think that's completely realistic. At the wildest dreams, I think they get it to 10 million users. But, people can't afford this.
It's hard to see the ROI on lobbing all those satellites up just from that TAM that you're talking about.
Right. It's a difficult difficult business.
Two little acronyms in one sentence.
But it goes back to they're beating each other up. They have a huge amount of capital, and it's really putting a lot of pressure on the geosatellite companies who were in this business. And it's great for consumer. It's difficult to see how a pure investor makes a lot of money. But if you look at who's putting the money in now, they're not doing this for pure investment reasons, right? And Amazon will probably monetize because their business is built on broadband. They'll probably get benefits for that. They see a benefit, and the European government will UK, your tax dollars have helped fund OneWeb, right? And then the European Union, because they came in through Eutelsat, the rumors are that the Gen 2 OneWeb system may become the European broadband satellite company, but there's alternatives, but. So their tax dollars may fund the Gen 2 system of OneWeb, and then. The consumers of Amazon are funding, a system, right?
Do you think any of these guys have sort of aspirations to be really disruptive in terms of knocking the terrestrial networks to one side and being like a global operator that can do a satellite-based broadband service economically and compete against the likes of BT doing fiber in London?
I think some of them they're all thinking about it, how they would do that. These people, they like disrupting. Jeff Bezos is famous about saying your margin is my opportunity. Elon disrupts a whole bunch of stuff. He prides himself in being an innovator disruptor. So I think those are all things that if they can figure out a way, they'll certainly try.
Did you see there was something we wrote it up, just a bit of journalism, which if you're not familiar with that term, it's us writing up someone else's journalism, hence journalism. About, I think
it's one better than plagiarism.
Yeah, it's basically attributed plagiarism.
Right.
About how Bloomberg had got some scoop about how Amazon was thinking of offering, at least in the States, mobile contracts as part of Prime. Like, you get video as part of Prime.
Yeah.
And then apparently that just
I
when
think
that Bloomberg,
everybody's channelized that one.
yeah, and when that Bloomberg story came out, like all Verizon, AT&T's share price went down and stuff.
So
And-
I watched that. I think
Yeah.
the insight here is it's probably I'm 95% that had a basis of truth. They were talking to somebody in M&O, and those people that were talking to may not have thought through the long-term strategic
Right.
implications of what they were doing. And when the stock price went down, the C-suite of those companies said, what are you doing over, right?
Yeah.
So, and so they probably rethought that, and all these declarations that nobody's doing this is probably true too. So it's
Yeah.
probably all true.
That's something that cracks me up, Charles. You're CEO, and you've obviously sat at the top table more often than me, which is at least once. But it does sometimes crack me up as a business journalist, just seeing how often these people at the top table with great salaries and reputations and job titles just fucking blow it. They just make some really like Amazon did one. I mean, and you can sort of forgive someone like Bezos or Musk where they roll the dice. You sort of think, fair enough. But I remember when I just started this job back in 2014, I just come from being a smartphone analyst. And they launched this thing called a Fire Phone. And it was the Amazon's Android phone, except it wasn't proper Android because they wanted to just fill it with Amazon-centric stuff. So basically, the long and short of it is that you couldn't get most of the Android goodness. And yet it still costs as much as a premium Android phone. And I remember writing at the time, this is never going to fucking happen. And of course, it was a complete waste of time, and no one bought it, and it just ended up being paperweights. But it is amazing how every now and then they will try these things, and you just think, what were they thinking?
Right.
But then again, we were just talking about the business model. We were talking about the business model of things like Starlink and Project Kuiper. Is that what we call it?
That's it, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's Kuiper.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then I think what made me get onto the folly of some CEOs.
It's the Kuiper belt. So the outside of the solar system, they have
Right.
a bunch of small bodies and comets that come out of the Kuiper belt. So it's named out of,
we go.
after that. So,
Yeah.
but sorry, go ahead.
No,
go ahead,
it's
Scott.
good. It's good to have a space dude on to.
So
about these things.
the insight here you're getting to is a very important thing. So if you don't encourage risk taking in a company, then everybody gets too conservative.
Yeah.
And so the best part about the Fire Phone, I think, is that Bezos owns it. Right? We did this. It was a complete failure, but I'd rather try,
roll the dice. Yeah.
roll the dice, and learn from it. He calls the distinction here is a one-way door versus a two-way door. So a one-way door, as you go through it, you can't come back. There's, you're not risking the company. But if you don't try stuff and everybody sees you're so risk averse of trying stuff, then all the people around the CEO become risk averse too.
And then
right?
self-reinforcing.
And then that becomes worse because you don't try things and you die as a company because you're not innovating, you're not taking risks. And what you want to do is encourage people to take smart risks. Can you take this bet? If it doesn't work, you're fine. If it doesn't work, you learn something. And if it does work, it's a big breakthrough.
It's hard to get the balance right, isn't
right?
it?
You got
I
to
think.
get that balance, right?
And you've done that, Charles. I mean, you were talking earlier about people looking at you like you were mad when you were coming up with stuff. And here we are. That was 15 when you were first talking about this stuff?
Well, we figured it out in 2015, right? And so the first thing is you don't want to, you have to convince yourself, right? And you can't be a fool, right? Because this sounds great, I'll just go do it. So the first thing we did is we went to 5 experts, my most precious resource is my time. And if I go start this company on this crazy idea and it doesn't work,
waste of time
I'm the fool. So we went to the experts, all over, many different experts, and said, we think we can connect a satellite to a phone. Tell me whether we can do this. And so one of the experts we went to is the JPL Deep Space Network. And we asked them and said, these people have satellites outside the solar system. The Voyager and Pioneer satellite, are outside the solar system. These people know physics. They know communications, what can be done. And so I had a NASA background. People on my team had a NASA background. And we went to them and they first said, there's no way you can do this, right? That's crazy. And we said, here's our Lynk budget, all right? He said, the Lynk budget says we can do it. And they said, let us look at that. And they looked at it and they came back a couple of days later. He said, "You're right. You can do it. This is amazing."
What do you mean by budget in this context?
So it's the physics of the link margin of connecting any two devices is called a link budget, right? So the bigger antenna you have, the more link margin you have.
I was thinking you weren't just saying, "Here's how much cash we've got."
No. It's a link. It's a physics-based
Is that
link
where
budget.
you get your name from?
So, well, actually not.
Ah.
Right. We just but we were doing that at the time. It's, Link, we just need a short, snappy, memorable people, then we came up with that. We had a crazy, stupid name at the start. It was called Ubiquity Link. And that was a mouthful. I said, we need a better one. We finally figured it out and we chose Link. But these people said, this is, you can do this. And we did that 5 other times, right? And always the reaction was the same. So the great thing about this is the best startups are the one that people say it's not obvious. They tell you this is like crazy.
Yeah.
And then you say, you show them it can be done. It's like, wow, you actually can do it. It's completely non-obvious, right? Those are the best businesses to start.
That was something I learned, actually. I mentioned I was a smartphone analyst in my previous life. And that was something I learned just from seeing some of our interactions with our clients. So, and all our clients would be the major smartphone makers. And this was about, 9 years ago, so you can do the maths. So it wasn't, the smartphone was still, the smartphone boom was still in the near rearview mirror, like the iPhone, Android smartphone boom. But I definitely got the impression there were the likes of, someone like Samsung, where they're a big company, but their innovation tended to be fast follower, incremental, low risk type of thing. And I may well be doing Samsung a massive disservice here, but this was the impression I got at the time. And, and that's a model. And that's fine. Samsung's fucking huge.
It's worked for
company.
them.
Yeah. But I just always thought, all you're really doing is just saying, oh, look, Apple's just done this. Why don't we just do something that's pretty close to it? It's not quite reverse engineering, which some parts of the world have been accused of. But fast following is the kind way of putting it.
Give Samsung credit. They came up with the first oversized smartphones that Apple had to follow eventually, right? So they've done some...
Right.
But
we used to call them, back when I was at Strategy Analytics, phablets.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Thank God that term went away.
It never stayed.
That was annoying.
Well, it was also spelt oddly as well.
Well, because it's phone and tablet. It's a portmanteau of phone and tablet, hence the PH.
Yeah.
But it's still annoying.
I don't see many people with them.
Well, because everything's a phablet now. What we used to describe as a phablet was something like a 6-inch screen.
If
or
you've got an iPhone Pro, then you've got a phablet, more or less.
This is a phablet?
That's a Pro.
Try and remember what the first iPhones were like. They were tiny compared to that.
Yeah.
They make a bigger one than this.
Yeah, there's a bigger version of that.
That's
iPhone Pro
somewhere in the
Max.
middle.
Sorry, it's the iPhone Pro
I think it was like 6 to 7 because the idea was there were some tablets that went as small as about 7 or 8 inch screen diagonal. Anyway, but that's interesting.
These satellites that are outside the solar system, and this is total tangent here, but
Right.
how do they how do they monitor that? I mean,
They have the NASA Deep Space Network. They have a humongous antenna on the ground pointed at them in space. And this is the physics of it. You can have big antennas and you have a low data rate.
Yeah.
You can close the link 2 ways with these satellites outside the solar system. So that's
crazy.
They're constantly, we're monitoring them. We get, what the environment is out there in deep space. They're sending back
Does it
data.
change?
Oh, yeah. There's a point outside the solar system, well outside the solar system, where the solar wind from the sun, the feeling of that, sensing that disappears. And there's a bow shock where you're really in interstellar space. So those satellites have moved into interstellar space.
So they're in another solar system.
Well, they're between solar systems, right? But they're truly in interstellar space. So that was in theory, and so these satellites prove that place existed where you're truly in interstellar space.
Wow.
Ian, before you go down that rabbit hole too much.
Sorry.
We've only got maximum half an hour left.
Oh, yeah.
And there was one other tangent. I mean, not tangent, a different bit of news that I wanted to talk about, which hopefully you'll feel all right chatting about. It's got fuck all to do with what we've just been saying.
All Telecom even.
But we were just chatting about Apple and innovation and rolling the dice. And there was a bit of news that came out today where yesterday evening, UK time, Apple launched this new, augmented, virtual,
ski
extended reality type of thing, ski mask thing. And I just thought we'd chat about that. And feel free. You don't have to make any professional comment on it. You can just talk about it like a punter or whatever.
Well, because everybody who has an Apple device, it's kind of personal. You can chat about it.
And you're one
right?
of them, are you?
Yeah.
In common with most Americans. What's the install base of iPhones in the US? It's pretty big.
Well, it's well over 50%.
Yeah,
and it's taken over all the kids. You're not cool if you don't have an iPhone.
Japan's the other ridiculous one, isn't it? For a country with its own sort of smartphone brands, everybody owns an iPhone.
Because back when I used to track this, the global install base was something like 20% Apple and 80% Android.
I think we're seeing a lot of switching recently as well from Android
in favour of Apple.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But even so, the majority of the world, if they've got a smartphone, is Android rather than Apple because it's cheaper. I mean, you got it goes down the stack. Even the cheapest iPhone is what we'd call a premium tier in the analyst game.
Yeah, it's like £400.
So they've launched this thing, and I'll summarise it. I didn't cover it. Andrew did for us. He did a great job. In fact, we were talking about it earlier. We were just arguing the toss before you arrived, Charles, and we realised that none of us, except for Pierre, had really looked into it that much. And Ian and I were just shooting from the hip based on a limited amount of information. But that's never stopped us. That's what podding's all about, as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
But yeah, so it's called Vision Pro, and we described it in the headline, which I tweaked, and I think perhaps mistakenly, I don't know if I got it right. I described it as an augmented reality headset, but just to summarise what it is.
Spatial computing is what they call it.
They call it spatial computing, which sounds a bit of a sort of wanky term, if you ask me. And why have they got pro in it? I mean, pro is so redundant.
Yes.
It
I think
annoys
it means
me.
this is why it's so expensive right now.
Because it's pro. It's only for pros.
So that
I'm not a
means
pro,
that
so I
they're
won't
going to
buy
have
that.
the Vision version that's cheaper later and rename it, right?
See, I wouldn't mind if they had amateur version, but they never do that. The marketing people, it's only ever pro.
It doesn't sound good, amateur,
Rookie.
in a product name.
Yeah, rookie, entry level, vanilla, whatever. But the thing about
Vision poor.
the thing
Only
about it is,
$600.
it looks like a sort of ski goggles, and you could be forgiven for thinking that it's transparent. So my thing, just to backtrack a little bit before we get into this, we've spoken about augmented reality, virtual reality, metaverse, all that shit on the pod loads of times. And I think, I don't want to speak for Ian, but I think we will agree that virtual reality, i.e. a headset where you're just completely immersed in this digital environment, is quite a niche use case, i.e. you can't wear it out and about because you'll be walking in front of cars and shit like that. So you wear it at home, ideally in some kind of padded cell, and then you can go around playing tennis or doing martial arts.
Omnidirectional treadmill and
or something like that. So it's a
Are
very...
these things on sale right now? When are they going to sell?
early next year, I think.
Early next year?
Yeah,
so
early next
you're
year.
going to see people early next year walking around with
It's a
these things.
scary thought.
Well, exactly. So this is why you might be right, Charles, because I've always said that that previous pure VR use case is very niche for all the reasons I just described. It's just constrained by health and safety as much as anything else. But if you've got what I would describe as a heads-up display like fighter pilots have or whatever, where you've got the glasses like me and Ian are wearing, but then over and above, you've got superimposed this sort of digital information, and I can look at you. It's like Terminator, isn't it?
Right.
When you see from the inside of Terminator's head in those films.
Yeah.
And I can see it, and suddenly I'm seeing your biography and seeing whether you're getting a bit stressed out and wishing I'd get to the fucking point.
It actually, you know what would be cool if it could monitor you and tell me when you're lying, right? So,
Well, there we go.
right? That'd be pretty
That's
cool.
coming.
Exactly.
Scott's lying about
Alarm
that,
bell,
right?
Charles is talking shit, Scott. I'd drill down on that one if I were you. And so that's the ultimate, that sort of Terminator fighter pilot heads-up display. But there's also that health and safety thing, which is you need to be able to see what's going on. If you're going to have some kind of sort of dialed-in relationship with the digital world, but still conduct your normal life, you need to be able to see normal life. We're not going to stop. We're not just going to turn into brains in a jar, just existing entirely through the metaverse, no matter what Zuckerberg thinks.
Right.
So this one, what's interesting about this...
It's got 6 cameras.
Yeah. So it's not actually a clear screen, but what it's got is tons of cameras all around it, a lot of them pointing outwards.
Right.
And what it apparently does is film the outside world and then project what it's filming onto this screen and then superimpose all this digital goodness onto it. And then at the same time...
So it is the Terminator.
So this is fascinating. In fact, this whole line of thought, marry AI with these glasses, and the AI that's in your glasses will figure out what's going on and inform you. So it actually, these could grow into the Terminator. right?
Yeah.
AI and these glasses become
Exactly.
the beginning.
And which, funnily enough, Terminator is what I nearly always invoke when we talk about AI as well.
And you just need one of Musk's brain implants, and
Right.
then you're laughing.
But I would have thought that would take it a step further, because if you've got a brain implant, you don't even need a peripheral like this. It's just
Maybe
going
not.
straight into your
Maybe not.
bunts, isn't it?
Right.
But anyway, so they've come out with this thing, Apple Vision Pro headset, 'cause it's only for pros, not amateurs. And
Does that mean we can't use them?
yeah, I'm not often accused of being a pro. And it costs $3,500, I think.
Well, everybody here should have one here soon, right? You guys can afford that.
Yeah. On a wicked
I can afford
journalist.
I'm going to put it down on my Christmas list.
I can afford
gonna-
to buy it and use it for 13 days and then return it on the 14th day.
We could just say we need it for research for the pod or something.
Well, some people will get them. Some top press will obviously get them to review.
Yeah, well, some have already. We had to
won't,
link to
because
that.
Not on
we
the
don't do that kind of journalism.
Shout out to Paolo Pescatore, who was there.
He probably tried.
He was there, Paolo. Paolo,
yeah.
if you're listening, come on the pod and tell us about it, man. So anyway, I'll stop talking in a sec. What I really wanted to lead up to is somewhat sort of picking up where we left off when we were arguing the toss with Pierre earlier on. It's obviously very expensive. It's obviously outside, especially for what it can apparently do. And it's got I should say also, it's got a special operating system. Part of the cleverness is it's got eyeball trackers. So you've got this heads-up display, and you can navigate around a menu similar to the wall of apps that you get on your phone, but using your eyes.
You just look at it.
You just look at it.
I mean, you can do that on the PlayStation one, for example.
Right.
It's just this is
Right.
fine-tuned.
Fair enough.
The main thing is that this one doesn't have devices in your hands.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So
That's the big difference.
right. So you use a combination of your eyes and something else
You pinch your fingers, you drag.
Yeah,
you just-
the
hand
phone,
gestures.
the device can see where you pinch, and you grab something, and it'll actually manipulate it. Instead of doing a pointer, you're pinching and
Right.
moving it around. So it's pretty.
But presumably your hand has to be within the scope of the exterior
Yeah,
camera.
if you do it behind your back, it's
It's not going to happen. Yeah.
Right, right.
So I think that's all very clever and utopian. It's
Well,
so the big thing. I'll tee this up, Ian. Yeah, you're already coming up with some skeptical muttering. So let me pass the ball
I'll tell
to
you the one that I'm like skeptical about.
Okay, but let me pass the ball to you, Ian. So the thing I'll say, if I'm being devil's advocate in favour of this thing, is I wouldn't have $3,500 to pay for it. I'd certainly have an extremely earnest conversation with my wife if I suddenly dropped $3,500 on this. But I think Apple does have a track record, and bear in mind I'm an Android and a Windows user, so I'm no Apple fanboy at all. But Apple does have a track record of sort of setting the agenda in terms of consumer technology. And while I don't think many people will buy this particular iteration, I think we could probably look back on it in 5 or 10 years as a significant inflection point in terms of moving towards this heads-up display paradigm that I think is the only viable thing. What do you reckon, Ian?
no, I agree. I've completely come around to it.
Oh, stop being facetious.
They were looking at 500,000 units
Well,
first year.
I mean, I didn't read all the details of the
Yeah.
release earlier because I was busy doing other things, but it does sound quite
hello.
impressive. The camera aspect of it, and I don't know. It's very expensive. I don't see it becoming a mass market device. This
I agree.
particular one, but
So can you see any merit?
well, what they're probably going to do, I think this is probably the most interesting thing, is that the developer community will start doing quite interesting things with it. And then we see, because at the moment, if you put it on and you walk around your high street with these cameras pointing outwards and
Right.
you're able to sort of grab things and manipulate them, it won't get you anywhere. But who knows where it might lead in a year's time. Some of the apps that came along on the iPhone, when Steve Jobs first got up on stage and said, here's the first iPhone, and it looked great, but there was nothing to go with it. And then within 3 months' time, there were these whizzy things.
Well,
that
they
you
had to
never
start
even
an
thought
app
about.
store.
Yeah.
So did they announce an app store
totally.
for this
No.
thing?
Yeah, right
Oh,
away.
okay, so
Oh, they
cool.
did.
And then
Yeah.
the thing is, I didn't realize the iPhone was announced in January 2007 and then was released 6 months later. So this
Right.
is kind of the same thing. But the App Store came in with the
Like-
iPhone 3GS, I think.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
2
It
years
came
later.
a couple of years later. Yeah.
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 So this one is like, and it's got all the iPad apps compatible with it, which is like not the point because it's 2D.
I mean, things like Uber,
Right.
which you're about to use, is like an economy-changing thing,
Right.
and so who knows what could come out of. I think that's probably the most interesting thing
Right.
about it. The actual device itself will probably be succeeded by something that's more lightweight and lower cost. I mean, I still like the idea. I know Google gave up on it. They had the glasses, but I still think that's probably a better
Snapchat had a go at that as well.
A better thing than having something as big and clunky as, you look like you should be coming down a mountain on snow rather than
So
walking down the high
I
street.
think this. You guys are right, both right. It's brilliant and it's limited. That it's kind of like the first iPhone that's limited to what we have today. It's like the first Apple Watch is very limited to what you have today. But they had to do it. I think the reason they had to do it is they have to get the independent software developers inventing the Uber of these glasses, right?
Yeah.
They need to come up with how are you going to use it that they never thought of.
Yeah.
So and the only way to do that is have it out there and create this virtuous cycle where now all the innovative software people all over the world are going to like, well, I'm going to make an app for that, right? And there'll be 1 out of 100 is going to be brilliant, and 1 out of 1,000 is going to be a breakthrough, and it's like never thought of.
That's the amazing thing to think about, because we can't really imagine I know it's a really overused cliche term, we can't imagine what the killer app would be for a device like
Right.
this.
Who imagined
when it does come
Uber?
along, it'll seem so obvious.
Yeah, Uber's a classic.
Nobody
one.
imagined Uber when you had the first iPhone, right? And so it came around. So the second thing is I think the key immediate use cases are going to be more knowledge workers in the office, and maybe people in factories where everything is, where you're moving something and it's giving these lists, and tells you what to do, what not to do, what's on your to-do list, and keeps track, and you become much more productive. So knowledge workers, it might be a substitute to the extra big screens you have. So I heard one independent reviewer was talking about how this might be better than having that, on their laptop, the big screen. So that's an interesting that you could, substitute for the big screens that are on your Apple laptops that are connected in. So I think it'll be knowledge workers, but it'll be business cases to start. But I think eventually you get to some direct-to-consumer, but it's going to be these innovators that do the really cool app.
Well, the direct-to-consumer stuff reminds me of stuff I was writing about even before my previous life I was talking about. So this is 10, 15 years ago when I was first getting into mobiles. This is around the time when it was first kicking off. And people were talking a lot about what they called location-based services back then. And I remember Nokia had a very early attempt at AR, except that it wasn't through a headset, it was through your phone, but you'd move your phone around and it would know what you were looking at, and it would go, the utopia, the ideal, which never happened, is you'd be looking through your screen via the camera at the outside world, and then it would go, oh, this shop that you're about to walk past has got a special offer on jeans.
Yeah.
So why don't you pop in? And there were all these sort of ideas of incredible consumer applications
Things that telcos wanted to do.
AR back, and then the telcos would get a piece of the action and all that sort of thing, and it never really happened. And maybe it'll take something like this.
But I think some of that has happened now. Some of that
Do you think you
location-based
used
service stuff.
I mean, can you think of a time? I'm not trying to be a dick about it, but can you think of a time when you've used a location-based service on your phone?
Well, all the time, but not in that sense.
The map?
But the mapping, or just going, what
get me on
pubs are
Google
near
Maps.
me, things like
What pubs are near me? Yeah, but then you don't even Google Maps now or Apple Maps or whatever. If we went out and we went, we were sick of going to Rose and Crown, and we went, what pubs are near? And it said there's a White Hart. It wouldn't necessarily do this LBS stuff that was being hyped a decade plus ago, saying, and by the way, the White Hart's doing 2 for the 1 on gin and tonics, or something like that.
Maybe. I mean, thinking about that though, I could see, we were talking about this being like another iPhone, like a mass market device.
No, you were saying that.
No, I was saying that it wasn't going to be.
And I'm like, it's not either. Yeah.
But I could see a future point where a successor with the right kind of apps and the right kind of software community behind it takes over from smartphones. Because if you can have a pop-up menu in your sort of field of vision,
right,
and say, I want to call Teresa now, I want to send an email to someone and dictate it, or whatever you might do on your smartphone these days. Why would you need to carry a device at the same time? And then all of a sudden the kind of market shifts completely. But I thought what I really like is actually contact lenses that you stick in your eyes. You don't have any device at all.
Well, that's the ultimate cleverness. That's the ultimate heads-up display, isn't it? If you think about it, and this may be a massive oversimplification, but if you think about the linear evolution of the screen, So like we had cinema, then TV, then desktops, then laptops, then mobile devices.
Yeah, eventually it's no screen at all.
But this could be the next iteration. Like this is a screen that's clamped to your face.
Yeah.
Personally, from my sort of old gittish perspective, I've got a fair bit of Luddite pushback on the thought of going around constantly with
I don't
something.
think that's just a...
Well,
but that's not-
Scott, you have a screen on your face right now.
Yeah. That's vital.
But that's
Otherwise-
that's the typical analyst pushback, though, is that people don't like to walk around with things clamped to their face, and that's why I think this particular thing probably.
Well, they
won't
don't.
work,
They don't
but-
like to look like fools. So that's the one of the unique things that Apple's does. They're trying to make it look cool, right?
Yeah.
So it actually looks pretty good. It looks better than the Facebook version, right?
You look right in the
and it
Alps,
looks a lot better than the Google version. It's like it was kind of weird, right? So
No, but the whole promo of it was all indoor. Like all the promos, it's people indoor on their couch,
right.
in the living room. They never showed somebody. At least I don't remember outside.
Yeah, but they'd love it if they could have somebody walking along outside, and then all of a sudden maybe the teenagers go, "This is a really cool thing to wear."
Right.
I don't think they will, but
Just looking at the photos Andrew put in this thing, they're all of sort of young women wearing it, so they're trying to make it cool. The other thing that's slightly creepy about it is it's got an outside screen where inside cameras film your eyes and project them onto. Yeah, that is.
Okay, but it's not exactly that.
Go on then.
It's when you set it up, you scan your face, and then it creates a 3D fake version of your eyes that then displays.
What is it? Static?
No, it moves, but it's not cameras. It's more like a.
Okay.
Yeah. It's not like it's not an actual image.
Not
of
a
your
real,
eyes.
not
a
real
constant-
time.
Yeah,
I see.
It's like,
All right.
he's moving his eye to the right, so the eye. You know what I mean? It's not direct.
But it's still, the purpose of it is still this slightly spooky to create the impression of that you can see the person's face when you can't.
It is better though.
I think
Better than
I
just
think
nothing.
people found.
Yeah,
I
I hear
think found it spooky when you don't see anything, right?
Yeah.
So they that people want.
Fair enough.
And apparently, it turns on as soon as someone gets close to you. Like if I or get close to you, your eyes would turn on, and then I would come into the field of your game or whatever.
It is all quite Black Mirror, isn't it?
Yeah.
But then
blasted by an infrared beam.
the genius thing.
No, you gotta watch the thing. Just watch it.
The genius thing about Black Mirror is, well, one of the many things about it is how believable it was as just one increment beyond where we are now in terms of technology. And you'll always get that. And as I think maybe you were alluding to earlier, Charles, younger people obviously have got less baggage, less inertia. They're more willing to just accept these things.
Right.
And going, yeah, why not?
All right.
Yeah.
Whereas I've definitely got an old gittish Ludditism about me. But I mean, where I agree with Ian, so he and I were disagreeing more vehemently than we have on this pod about the merits of this thing. Where I completely agree with you, Ian, is trying to picture it as a mass market device. I'm really struggling to get my head around right now. What do you reckon, Charles? Do you think, loads of people could be walking around?
I think maybe Gen 3 or Gen 5, they get, mass market. I suspect they know that it's not going to be mass market, but they'll have a business uses, and they'll get a whole bunch of, 1 million people are going to develop apps, and they'll figure it out. The next version will be better, just like every Apple Watch was better, and it'll get, I think over time they'll get there, right?
I suppose it depends how compelling that app is. If there's an app that's just transformative.
What do you want? What do you want? What would make
He
you
doesn't know
buy?
what he wants.
Right?
I don't know yet. I mean,
I would buy
what
an
everyone
app
looks
that
like with their kit off, maybe.
tell me if people will lie to me, right? Like just the app.
But then they know not to lie to you when you're wearing
right?
the thing.
Tell me.
they go, sir, I'm going to have to ask you to take that off.
It's like a lie detector test built in.
Yeah, that'll probably be. You're in a negotiation.
gonna come.
It's like
Oh,
you
that's
got to take
frightening.
off your Apple goggles, right?
That's really scary.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it could render like mind-altering drugs obsolete. Where you could just have a sort of acidy, gangy.
You're always thinking about
sort of
drugs, aren't you?
experience. Yeah, that's my problem.
It's funny you said that. In the presentation, they were showing like meditation stuff, and it definitely has that vibe of 3D, like images and stuff.
I tell you where a lot of my resistance comes from is just surrender of control. The more and I
Have you
surrender.
ever tried VR before?
Yeah, that's my.
We've got one at home.
Well, that's the difference between you and the kids, right? They
PlayStation.
don't have any illusions about.
But they got a bit bored of it.
Oh, the PlayStation one is a good one.
Yeah.
The last one.
But they got a bit bored of it. We played it for a bit. They were all excited.
PS5.
4.
Oh, yeah. Okay. PS5 it's big big changes.
Right.
Yeah.
You got that, have you?
No, my nephews do.
The Oculus is
I don't
good.
have any console. No, it's a PS5
With an
VR thing,
Oculus.
which until yesterday was kind of like the tip of this.
So they have their own. Sony has their own.
Sony's got their own VR.
Yeah.
But it has to be plugged in the console.
And you have to use a little.
So I remember using an Oculus one at a friend's house a few weeks ago,
Yeah.
and there's a game where you're climbing,
Yeah.
like in Yosemite or something,
Right.
and I was like, this is going to be rubbish. I'm not interested. I'd rather just sit and have another Hazy Jane, and it was actually really realistic. Like, I'm not super realistic, but enough to make you feel a bit dizzy and like,
Right.
I don't want to fall off this ledge
right,
right
right.
now.
Yeah.
So I was quite impressed, but I don't know if I want to go there because it's a bit Ready Player One, isn't it?
So that's what I'm admitting, and I'm not saying it's rational, and it could be very much age as much as personality related or experience related. That it's just the amount just the analog sit in a pub, drink beer, talk shit thing, as opposed to everything be digital.
But I think in the future, when everybody's using these things and they're all sort of zoned into it, I'm going to be the guy sitting at the bar reading an old copy of The Sun in print format.
That you'd fold it in your back pocket.
That I'd fold in my back pocket, and then I'll be,
But I think
a
you
true
won't
Luddite.
But you'd be
that.
reveling in it by that stage.
I think it won't replace interactions like you just described.
No.
It'll replace maybe video gaming, maybe viewing TV, which I get it. It's better if you have just a friend next to you and laugh at the movie versus both wearing goggles.
But then, again, I've got to sort of claim hypocrisy. In our household, we pretty much all retreat to our respective corners and watch personal screens. There's very little communal viewing.
There you
My wife and my son have started watching Tarantino films together for some reason. But yeah, I'll go off
great.
and
They left you out. So
He's seen them all.
yeah, I've got a really shitty attention span, really shitty boredom threshold, and I've just always been a computer games guy, partly because of that.
Right.
Even TV alone, I
so
like.
what you're
I think
saying
that's
is a
quite
great
sad.
computer game would suck you in.
Probably, yeah.
Right.
The one that was just utterly transformative, a completely new experience.
Right.
That would probably be
Well,
my
I don't think
killer
your
app.
household's unusual. Like ours is quite similar to that. Like at the moment I've usually got the tennis on in the evening. Magda's on her phone, and Alex will be on a YouTube video looking at some
Yeah.
skateboarding stuff.
You got
And
to
it's like-
plan an event where we're all together, right?
Yeah.
And everybody has to
And then
break
everybody
away.
drifts away sometimes.
Let's go to a movie. And it's like it's such pulling teeth. Oh, we got to do something with
Yeah.
mom and dad, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, look,
Sadly.
we're running out of time. Actually, one thing occurs to me, you're talking about tennis. So we're recording this on Tuesday. It'll get up in the next day or two. And then we're obviously not recording on Friday, partly because Ian and I is going to be at French Open, isn't it? We're being taken there by Orange. So that'll be quite cool. That's part of a feast of tennis that's in store for us. So think of us on Friday, just having a nightmare, sipping Sancerre and watching. Actually, you don't like white wine, so you wouldn't
Not
be able to.
really, no.
What do you reckon for the win?
Well, it's either Alcaraz or Djokovic, I would say.
Yeah. It's
So
the
whoever
final.
wins that semi wins.
Yeah.
So we're going to be seeing semis. They're not scheduled to meet up in the semis, are they?
Yeah, it's Alcaraz versus Djokovic.
Oh, shit, so we
my
might see that
predictions
semi
are
on Friday.
Alcaraz versus Djokovic, and the other one I think will probably be Zverev versus Rune. But we won't get to see both of them because we've got to leave to get home because we didn't book a hotel. We're getting the last.
But we're
train
getting
back.
the last one back.
Yes.
But they keep playing for quite a while, don't they?
They'll finish late at night. We've got to leave at
They-
7:30. But
Tonight, the Alcaraz plays at 8 in local time.
yeah,
So if we're lucky,
we'll see one of the matches.
and obviously seeing Alcaraz versus Djokovic would be the kick-ass.
Yeah, but they'll put that one on the evening, so we'll probably see the other one.
bastards.
Well, Rune's really good.
Come on, French Open.
And so is Zverev.
Oh, they won the
That's
audience.
what-
I know, but it's not quite the same, is it?
Oh, okay.
All right. Well,
This is
anyway.
a total tangent.
Yes, it is total tangent, and Charles is a CEO with important shit to do, so we will wrap it up at that stage. It was great. I'm pleased we made this happen with like a few days' notice. And
Well,
thanks a
thanks,
lot
guys.
for coming
Thanks
in.
for moving things around.
Yeah, no, and thanks for giving us your time. It's much appreciated, and it was really interesting. We don't do satellite that much, do we?
No.
So I think we got a real deep
Well,
dive
this
there.
is satellite
That's good.
and it's mobile, right? So that's
Yeah.
that's
Yep.
part of convergence,
Yep.
Yeah, in fact, that was one last thing. We've got one or two more minutes, hopefully.
right?
I was just thinking about it slipped my mind, but now that you've mentioned the convergence, VR, AR, XR, MR, whatever the fuck they want to call it, some kind of reality, has often been touted as this 5G. Like with 5G, part of our daily writing is that they're struggling to find the business case for 5G.
Right.
4G, it's obvious it was mobile broadband done properly, but we're not quite sure what the business case for 5G. And I've always felt they're reaching a little bit, talking about augmented reality and virtual reality in a mobile
Right.
since. So, just one last thought. I don't want to put you on the spot. It's only just occurred to me. But, do you think that's viable? Do you think for things like this Apple thing we were just talking about, that could ultimately be a strong driver for business for mobile connectivity, which could, of course, include what you do?
Well, that's fascinating. So
given you like 2 minutes.
never say never. But it goes to the consumer. If there's walking around the street, when you're in home, it's going to be over Wi-Fi, so that's not going to drive 5G. But does this drive
totally
more, broadband use cases? Hell if I know, right?
Yeah.
So I'm focused on, just since the end of this is, the world has a 0G problem, right? Right, and mostly people sitting in suburbs and cities forget about the hundreds of millions of people who have a mobile phone in their pocket and have 0G right now, right? And anything is better than nothing. And we need, to solve that problem. And there's another billion people we're predicting are going to come on because they have affordable connectivity with an affordable phone in their area. And so it's going to bring the next billion people into the mobile wireless world over time, and it's going to pull people out of poverty. So what you guys are doing, what the mobile wireless industry is doing, partnering, and Lynk is going to partner we're all together going to, extend the 21st century to people where they live. You don't have to move where you live in these rural, remote communities. You're going to get access to the 21st century. And together we're going to pull a whole bunch of people out of poverty and save lives, and that's why we're doing this. We're very excited by having everywhere, everyone connectivity, no matter what.
And that's a really compelling pitch. And we know that governments are increasingly treating connectivity as a sort of primary, not just strategic, but also just serving their electorate sort of thing. I think you've summed that up well. I won't elaborate further on that, other than to thank you again, and hope we haven't kept you too long, and you'll make your next appointment. And you're always welcome back if there's some new announcements. If you've got your thousandth, that's a tough one after a couple of beers,
right?
Satellite up or whatever. But cheers, Charles, and thanks for coming on.
All right, thanks, guys. And next time I'll bring a different selection of American beer.
There we go. That sounds like a plan. Okay, and thank you for listening, and make sure you join us for the next one.